Riley was half serious. How had this happened to him? How had he gone from being opposed to taking a wife one day to acting as if he'd swallowed an ancient herbal love potion the next? He guessed, in part, his awakening desires had to do with the fact that when he'd vowed to his dad that he'd get married, he'd finally given himself permission to move on from Helen. Yes, the thought of making mistakes again still terrified him, but he couldn't forget. He was no longer the same inexperienced and immature man who'd married Helen. He'd grown up, and more importantly, he was taking his faith seriously and doing his best to live an upright life. Surely this time he'd prove himself to be a better husband. Riley reached for the glass of stout Bellamy was sliding his way. He took a sip and wet his tongue, then wiped the foam from his upper lip. "Are you going to tell me why James Shanahan agreed to meet with me? Is he impressed with my bid to become mayor?" Georgie was still grinning, his front gums showing.
"His little gal is turning into an old biddy, that's why. And everyone knows that long churning makes bad butter."
"Finola hasn't been churning for long." Bellamy poured another glass of stout. "No, James Shanahan likes a man with ambition, and he sees your potential." "Not sure ambitious is how I describe myself. And he's taken a shine to the idea of working out a deal that Rafferty Wagon Company buys Shanahan iron for their wagon parts." Has he now? Maybe he had more to offer the Shanahans than he'd realized. But neither of those are the real reason Shanahan is interested in you, Riley. "What's the real reason, then?" Georgie's gaze was darting back and forth between them.
"She's as stiff as a brass bedstead."
Riley shook his head. Finola was anything but stiff. Bellamy's eyes twinkled as though he'd heard Riley's thought. "Shanahan didn't tell me in exact words, but I guessed what it was, so I did." "What is it?" Riley rubbed a thumb around the rim of his glass. "Maybe someday, if you haven't figured it out on your own, I'll tell you." Fair enough. Even if Shanahan was willing to meet with him, that was only the start. He had to make Finola like him. And that might prove the biggest challenge of his life.